The views expressed are not those of local community broadcasting, WYML LP, or its management, volunteers, or underwriters. Welcome back to the Personal Safety Show. This is Marcus Melnick with Firearm Mentor and Stress to Logic, your host. And in the first segment of the show, we were talking about this class I'm taking with Wake Forest University called Sociology of Guns. It is taught by Dr. David Yamani. He's got a book coming out. He is a friend of the show, and he has been on prior to this class beginning about a month and a half ago. There's only a couple sessions left, and I've committed to, once I learn something that's quite interesting and quite new, at least to me, and I'm pretty well read, that I wanted to share with my listeners. So we were talking about some of the professional research, and this next article that I have, I kind of am opposed to the source. So the source is a journal called Preventative Medicine, and the contents are available at Science Direct. The journal homepage is www.elsevier.com/locate/YPMED. I'm going to give that to you again in case you want to read the entire article. It is www.elsevier.com/locate/YPMED. While you have your pens and pencils out, you can write down my electronic business card. That is Marcus, M-A-R-C-U-S, Melnick, MELNICK.com. That has all of my contact, my websites, my contact information, and I would absolutely love it if you would reach out, share your thoughts with me on what I'm talking about today and in the future and all that good stuff. I love talking to people. So, with that said, we're going to be talking about this medical article that, and here's my problem with it. It's a medical article, and I don't believe it belongs in medicine. I don't believe that this is a medical problem, but the world of medicine has said. So the title of this article is Sources of Guns to Dangerous People. Where are the bad guys getting their guns? The subtitle is What We Learned by Asking Them. This is by Philip Cook, Susan Parker, and Harold Pollack from Duke University, University of Chicago Crime Lab, and University of Chicago. So again, they refer to violence as, quote, gun violence. And they're saying that gun violence exacts a lethal toll on public health. And this article, this paper, focuses on reducing access to firearms by dangerous offenders. Now, I can get on board with that. I don't want a dangerous offender to have a gun. I don't really care. Oh, they have a right to defend themselves. Yeah, but there's too much history there for someone to just have a firearm to defend themselves if they have a long rap sheet. The original empirical data on the gun transactions that arm offenders in Chicago have been studied. This study was conducted in the fall of 2013 and was an analysis of an open-ended survey of 99 Cook County Jail inmates, and it focuses on a subset of violence-prone individuals with the goal of improving law enforcement actions. Among the findings, they've said that respondents who are adult offenders living in Chicago or nearby obtain most of their guns from their social network of personal connections. Rarely is the proximate source either direct purchase from a gun store or theft. Only about 60% of the guns in possession of respondents were obtained by purchase or trade. Other common arrangements include sharing guns and holding guns for others. 1 in 7 respondents reported selling guns, but in only a few cases as a regular source of income. And gangs continue to play some role in Chicago in organizing gun buys and in distributing guns to members as needed. The Chicago Police Department has a considerable effort on the workings of the underground gun market through deterrence. Transactions with strangers and less trusted associates are limited by concerns over arrest risk if the buyer should happen to be an undercover police officer or a snitch. And we all know snitches get stitches and end up in ditches. And people don't want to be caught with a, quote, dirty, end quote, gun, which is one that's been used in a crime. Again, no surprises here. In another journal, Violence and Gender, and this title is Baltimore's Underground Gun Market, Availability of and Access to Guns. This is written by several PhDs and Masters in Public Health, Masters. In this study, underground gun markets create opportunities for individuals who are prohibited from gun ownership to gain access to firearms. Understanding how these individuals obtain guns and their unsuccessful attempts to get guns is key to developing interventions that effectively restrict the supply of guns in an underground market. The study of criminal justice involved men, or 195 people in Baltimore City, was conducted about their experiences in the underground gun market, of whom 30% reported having any experience in the underground gun market. More than half of these people were unsuccessful in their most recent attempt to gain a firearm due to cost or source-related barriers. Over 80% of individuals who did not already have access to a gun wanted one, in other words, 31 out of 38. They reported wanting to acquire one for safety or protection. 31%, or 18 out of 58, reported that there was a certain gun shop employee who would sell guns off the record or make sales to obvious straw purchasers. Most respondents who have had access to firearms had handguns, 90%, and individuals reported selling or trading a gun for money, 69%, drugs, 46%, or other guns, 23%, or accepting guns as payment for drugs. Although an underground market can facilitate access to firearms, there are barriers that can prevent acquisition by high-risk individuals, and efforts should focus on strategies that increase accountability and restrict the supply of guns in an underground market, or those that provide alternatives to gun carrying and feel safe. Again, no surprises here. In yet another article, also in preventative maintenance, and it's the same website as before, www.elsevier.com/locate/YPMED. This title is Privately Manufactured Firearms, Newly Purchased Firearms, and the Rise of Urban Gun Violence. So, this abstract of this article talks about gun violence increasing dramatically after the COVID-19 pandemic. And I'm going to opine here, a lot of mental health issues have arisen following the COVID-19 pandemic, and this is just part of that. Surges in criminal access to untraceable, privately manufactured firearms and new guns purchased from licensed dealers have been suggested as risk factors associated with the pandemic increase in gun violence. Official data of over 4,500 guns recovered in Oakland, California between 2017 and 2021 that were submitted to the ATF for tracing are analyzed to determine whether the sources of crime guns changed and whether privately manufactured and fast time to crime traced guns were more likely to be used in violent crime during this period. Descriptive statistics are used to summarize the characteristics of firearms recovered during the study and the study period and the results of ATF tracing. Logistic regression models are then used to access systematic differences between firearms recovered during pre-pandemic years as compared to the pandemic years and determine whether certain firearms are more likely to be recovered in violent crime. These analyses estimated large increases during the pandemic in the odds that favored firearms were privately manufactured and recently purchased. Recovered privately manufactured firearms were also more likely to be associated with violent crimes. The findings support recent efforts to regulate privately manufactured firearms and continued efforts to reduce the illegal diversion of firearms from lawful commerce. So this is basically saying ghost guns are found in crimes. Another article, Cogent Social Sciences, Legal Cynicism and Protective Gun Ownership Among Active Offenders in Chicago. And this article can be found at T&DF Online. That's Taylor and Francis Online. tandfonline.com. The article is there. And it talks about most gun owners reporting having their guns for protection. However, these are national estimates and they're likely to undersample residents of marginalized urban communities where rates of violent crime victimization and presumably the need for personal protection are more pronounced. This undersampling limits our understanding of motivations for gun ownership within the, quote, hidden, end quote, group of active criminal offenders that are more likely to be both victims and offenders of street crime. Drawing on past work linking neighborhood violence to legal cynicism and using data gathered by the Chicago Gun Project, CGP, measures of police legitimacy were employed to explore the effect of distrust of legal agents on protective gun ownership among active offenders in Chicago. The data confirms that lower levels of police legitimacy are significantly related to a higher probability of acquiring a firearm for protection. That means lack of trust of the police increases firearm ownership. Gang membership, legal changes in Chicago, and gun behaviors are related to protective gun ownership, as well as how community policing and procedural justice can improve perceptions of police and enhance their legitimacy, potentially reducing the incentives to engage in violent, extra-legal, quote, self-help, end quote, with a firearm. I don't agree with all this because this is going against part of my beliefs, but the studies are out there. In annualreviews.org, the Annual Review of Criminology, Volume 1, 2018, there is an article called Gun Markets. And this article is the systematic study of how available weapons influence the rates, patterns, and outcomes of criminal violence, that it's now well established in a fast-growing subfield in criminology, legal studies, public health, and economics. The review focuses on the transactions that arm dangerous offenders, noting that if those transactions could be effectively curtailed, it would have an immediate and profound effect on gun violence and homicide rates. Guns are legal commodities, but violent offenders typically obtain their guns by illegal means. Our knowledge of these traditions come primarily from trace data on guns recovered from the police and on occasional surveys of gun-involved offenders. Because most guns used in crime are sourced from the stock of guns in private hands rather than purchasing from a licensed dealer, the local prevalence of gun ownership appears to influence the transaction costs and proportions of robberies and assaults committed with guns rather than knives or other weapons. Nonetheless, regulations that govern licensed dealers have been linked to trafficking patterns and in some cases the use of guns in crimes. In looking at another article called Whose Guns Are Stolen? The Epidemiology of Gun Theft Victims from Injury Epidemiology, that's the name of the publication. Gun theft has been an important source of guns used by criminals, yet no empirical work has focused on the characteristics of gun owners that distinguish those who have had their guns stolen from those who have not. In this study, we examined demographics and behavioral characteristics of gun owners who report having a gun stolen. It comes from a nationally representative, probability-based online survey conducted in April 2015 with a linked follow-up survey November of that year, and they asked about the previous 5 years. Of the 1,600 respondents, 2.4% reported that one or more guns have been stolen, with a mean number of guns per theft of 1.5. Risk factors were owning 6 or more guns, owning guns for protection, carrying a gun in the past month, storing guns unsafely, and living in the South region of the United States. The South accounts for 37% of U.S. households, 43% of gun owners, and 2/3 of all gun thefts. So, what is this article saying? And I hate to poo-poo it. I'm going to poo-poo it. In order to have your gun stolen, you have to own a gun. What? No kidding. No kidding. So, risk factors: owning more than 6 guns. Okay, if you're an enthusiast, you own more than 6 guns. Owning guns for self-protection. And you've seen that's the reason why most people own firearms. Carrying a gun in the past month. Yeah, no kidding, because they own it. They've been licensed. Storing guns unsafely. All right, I can jump on that. They need to be locked up. And living in the South region of the United States. Now, I don't really know. Causality and correlation are not the same thing. Is it correlated that 2/3 live in the 2/3 of gun thefts are in the South? Possibly. Is it a cause? I don't really know. There are approximately 250,000 gun theft incidents per year, with about 380,000 guns stolen. Certain types of gun owners who own many guns, who carry guns, and those who do not store guns safely are at a higher risk. And this is one of those interesting articles that is kind of silly. I'd love to hear from you. I also have upcoming classes for concealed carry on May 18th and 19th in the northwest suburbs. If you're interested in signing up, you can go to www.firearmmentor.com/classes. And on that website, you'll see in June, I'm running a recertification class, not an initial class. And tentatively, the next initial class would be the weekend of July 20th. So hopefully that fits into your schedule. Summertime is kind of rough for firearm businesses because who wants to sit in an air-conditioned room for 16 hours with me, although I make it entertaining, when they could be outside and at a pool, at the beach, on a walk, enjoying. So summertime is actually pretty slow for the firearms business, which means that if you sign up for these classes, there will be less people in them. And when there's less people in them, you get more individualized service, more individualized instruction. So I would highly encourage you to check out that website. Again, www.firearmmentor.com/classes. Let's segue to some breaking news from this week. As you know, if you've listened to the show, I typically don't do updates on the court cases that are happening because it's so-and-so filed this, so-and-so filed that, and quite honestly, it doesn't mean anything to the regular, everyday person. So that's why I typically don't give these little minuscule updates. However, if you go on YouTube, there's a lot of pundits and attorneys out there who do give these updates. And I was listening to one of them, and as I found out, there is movement with the gun ban challenges. The Supreme Court has moved them to conference. So there have been multiple cases challenging gun and magazine bans, including several lawsuits from Illinois, and they have been distributed for an upcoming conference of the U.S. Supreme Court. After Illinois banned more than 170 semi-automatic firearms and magazines over certain capacities in January of last year, there were federal lawsuits that were filed. There were lawsuits, there were appeals, there were separate preliminary actions against the law. Then it was shot down. Then it was reestablished by the 7th Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals last year. And in February, the plaintiffs, in other words, the firearm groups, asked the U.S. Supreme Court to intervene because we're getting multiple different readings from different courts. So this week, on Tuesday, the United States Supreme Court moved several Illinois cases and one challenging Maryland's ban to conference for mid-May of this year. Yay! So Alan Gottlieb, he's the Second Amendment Foundation chair, said it's very significant because we've been trying very hard to get a case to the Supreme Court dealing with these issues, and I think now we're going to get there. Gottlieb expects that if the court does take the case, all of them will be consolidated. The end of the month is realistic to find out, and it may happen in June. The state of Illinois argued in filings in the Seventh Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals, saying they made the right decision, that the ban has a likelihood of succeeding on its merits, equating banned semi-automatic firearms to military weapons. Gottlieb disagreed and said the Supreme Court has to send in. Gottlieb also said it's extremely important because if you can ban semi-automatic firearms today, you can ban single-shot guns tomorrow. The problem is that the Second Amendment is pretty clear, and it doesn't say that improvements to technology will limit your Bill of Rights. The plaintiffs say that states and lower courts are ignoring previous U.S. Supreme Court precedents set in 2022 that requires the state and court to reflect both the text of the Second Amendment and the right to keep and bear arms and founding-era gun regulations when making and defending gun control laws. One group of consolidated cases does remain in the Southern District of Illinois U.S. Court with the expectation of a trial on its merits to take place in July. There's also the Rahimi case. There's oral arguments that were heard on Tuesday, and the case deals with the constitutionality of a federal law that makes it illegal for individuals under a domestic violence restraining order to possess firearms. Rahimi is one of the slew of federal court decisions applying the Supreme Court's recent Second Amendment precedent of New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin in 2022, which requires that any statutory firearm restriction be consistent with the nation's historical tradition of firearms regulation. The case revolves around Zaki Rahimi, who was indicted for possessing a firearm while subject to a restraining order, which federal law criminalizes. However, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals has since nullified the conviction, declaring the statute unconstitutional. They based their decision on the absence of a strong historical tradition in the U.S. that supports denying the Second Amendment rights based solely on civil proceedings. The upcoming decision follows the landmark New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin, which revolutionized the framework for evaluating gun restrictions. According to Bruin, any statutory firearm restriction must align with the nation's historical tradition of firearm regulation. The court, however, now faces a crucial question. Can individuals like Rahimi, who are not yet convicted felons but have a history of violence, be deemed, quote, ordinary law-abiding citizens, end quote, entitled to full Second Amendment protections? Interesting. This says law-abiding citizens, but there have been courts that have ruled that illegal aliens can get firearms. Also, you don't need to be a citizen to get a firearm. If you're in the United States on a green card, you're not a citizen. You're law-abiding, but you're not a citizen. So I don't know where that came from, this article. Elizabeth Prelogar, I probably slaughtered that name, emphasizes that governments have a long history of disarming individuals who are considered a threat to public safety. She argued that this practice is well established in the law and should be upheld. She warned that justices allowing the Fifth Circuit Court decision to remain would have serious consequences for victims of domestic violence. Rahimi, on the other hand, urged the justices to review and reject and maintain the ruling of the Fifth Circuit. He described the Court of Appeals decision as a faithful application of Bruin. Rahimi acknowledged that it has not been long since the Supreme Court's decision in Bruin, and lower courts are currently reevaluating firearm restrictions based on the new historical framework. He suggested that justices should wait for more lower courts to interpret federal and state gun laws in light of Bruin before intervening. After reviewing the case in 2 consecutive conferences, judges decided to grant review without providing any comment. The case is expected to be argued in the fall of 2024, with a final decision likely to be reached next year. In tandem with these legal battles, there is a growing national divide over gun regulation. I see that all the time. Some states, like Tennessee, have enacted laws allowing teachers to be armed, demonstrating the polarizing nature of gun policy in America. As the court sets its sight on these pivotal cases, its rulings could have significant implications for future firearm regulations. Legislators and advocates on both sides of the gun policy spectrum are eagerly awaiting guidance from the justices, which could lead to the crafting of firearm regulations that not only comply with Bruin, but also account for public safety concerns. In an era where gun violence remains a heated topic of national concern, the Supreme Court's decision on these cases will not only define the boundaries of the Second Amendment, but also shape the legal and regulatory landscape of firearm possession in the United States for years to come. I should probably explain what conference is. Conference, in terms of the federal Supreme Court, is when all parties present their information to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decides whether to take up the case, which is called granting a writ, W-R-I-T, of certiorari, don't ask me how to spell that, which allows a case to be presented in front of the Supreme Court in a trial. So the conference is just presentation of the arguments to see if the Supreme Court wants to take up the case. And we'll be watching it with a keen eye. And as there are what I call real updates, I don't mean so-and-so filed this, Alan Gottlieb filed that, the state of Illinois filed this. I mean when there's a real decision or real news that does affect the listeners, I will bring it to the radio show. I hope you enjoyed, and please tune in next week for another awesome episode. We have monthly concealed carry license, CCL classes, in the northwest suburbs of Chicago. Dates can be seen at firearmmentor.com/classes. If you have a question, we can be reached at www.firearmmentorcard.com. That is our electronic business card, has all of our contact information and links in it. It's the easiest way to get a hold of us. Until next time, stay safe out there, and I'll see you at the shooting range. This is Marcus Melnick from Firearm Mentor signing off. The views expressed are not those of local community broadcasting, WYML LP, or its management, volunteers, or underwriters.